It's hard to arrive at an album like this without having some kind of expectations around it. So I am going to do my best to check those while also being extremely excited that we're finally getting this record that's been in the works for, I think, almost, if not 10 years. So, yeah, let's finally dive into it. Himlabacken Volume 2 by Moon Safari. Moon Safari is one of my absolute favorite retro symphonic progressive rock bands ever. I first heard them with Bloom Judd, and then I listened to Lover's End and The Doorway to Summer, and I was hooked. Absolutely, I was hooked. Their 4 to 6 part harmonies infused with this extremely pleasant and overly celebratory sounds was almost in complete opposition to a lot of the sounds that was going on when Doorway to Summer and Bloom Judd first dropped. And at that point, progressive rock was getting darker, it was getting heavier, it was getting more menacing. And here these blokes were coming out, and it was happy, it was fun, it was joyous, it had everything that I love about music in it, and it just completely blew me away. So yeah, love those 3 albums. Himlabacken Volume 1, which was the last album, was still fairly good. I think it was at that point the weakest album of the band's discography. It didn't have the same amount of epic sprawl that a lot of the other albums had. They concentrated more on concise, more condensed tracks, and in some cases it works. It has some really, really good stuff, Mega Moon and Candyland are both fantastic tracks, but the overall feeling that I had was it was good, it was a nice experiment, but I don't know, it was kind of the weaker track. So because it was issued as Himlabacken Volume 1, I was ready for Himlabacken Volume 2, and I was still ready for it, and it just never really blossomed, through, the band members just getting older and getting families, through inner struggles, personal struggles, not inter-conflict or anything like that, band members leaving and coming back. It just got harder and harder to see the light of day for Himlabacken Volume 2. So there were always whispers in the winds, and I think a couple years ago, I think even back in 2018, I remember when they were playing on Cruise to the Edge with actual new material that would be featured on this record, and it was okay, they're starting to actually getting some momentum going, and it just never once again solidified into anything. And with Moon Safari being one of the biggest acts in progressive rock, we were getting a little antsy. We were getting a little when's the next one coming? When's Himlabacken Volume 2 coming out? And finally, after all this time, they announced earlier this year that the album would be coming out. And so the stakes were high. The stakes were high for this one. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I think it is definitely a huge step up from Himlabacken Volume 1, and it's a little bit of a return to form in a certain sense as well. Because I love Lover's End, but there are tracks on there that I'm less than excited for. And the second disc of Bloom Judd, it's fine, it's good, I like it, but it doesn't hold a candle to the first disc of it. The only real start to finish solid Moon Safari album I could say was Doorway to Summer. But even with that caveat, there was always something on every single one of their albums that just made me gush and made me really look forward to the album itself. They haven't put out anything that I would say is less than a 9 out of 10. All of their albums are, if not a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. So we are now entering into Himlabacken Volume 2, Himlabacken essentially translating to Heaven Hill, and everything that we loved about Moon Safari is back. We've got those 4 to 6 part harmonies that permeate throughout the entire runtime of this album. It feels like, even though it's been 10 years, it doesn't feel like any time has passed at all, and luckily that goes to show the timelessness of the music that they're presenting, in that it hasn't aged at all, but it also just goes to show their mastery of constructing music that sounds timeless. This album does open up with a little bit of a change of pace as well. You know, there's a few motifs and a few things that they're trying on this album that they really haven't played with before. The first can be found on 1980X, or, you know, like 1980X. Or Heaven Hill. And I like the fact that they called it this because it sounds very 80s in its approach. You know, we have this kind of 80s flair. It opens up with this like very glam metal or glam hair rock, like synth sound that we love. I feel like this is some of the things that like Haken was trying with Affinity on tracks like 1985. And we hear this style of this kind of 80s synth rock, arena rock essence on a number of their other tracks as well, like Emma Come On and Blood Moon, you know, the 6th track, which has this really infectious bouncing bass line on it that feels straight out of like a Peter Gabriel, like Sledgehammer track or something along those lines. Like it's definitely channeling a Tony Levin in terms of the bass line on that. But definitely this kind of like 80s fun synthwave motif along there I absolutely love. And as I mentioned, it opens the track up in 1980X, Heaven Hill, which does what a lot of opening tracks for Moon Safari does, in that it just kind of paves the way for the rest of the tracks. And then we come into the second track, which holds the second larger kind of motif that the band would be playing with Between the Devil and Me, which is a little bit of a darker tinge, you know, just with the subject matter of Between the Devil and Me. And this was the first single that they released, and I believe this was the track that they actually toured with Cruise to the Edge, that I remember seeing a bootleg, you know, like a handheld camera from Cruise to the Edge of this track, and it is just fantastic. You know, we're getting back to the longer stretches of music. This track is 10.5 minutes long, and it has this darker tone to it. There's almost like a metal sound within the guitar works. You know, they're not necessarily playing any blast beats or metal chugging works, but the soundscapes that they're playing with are definitely more akin to a metal workings. And I love that they're kind of infusing this. It feels like what Flower Kings were trying with Desolation Rose, in trying to be a little bit darker in its approach, but I feel like they succeed a lot more in contrasting. You know, not the entire album is in this dirge, dark stylings. They're using it as a contrast to make those brighter moments shine that much more. And man, I love the big builds that are found on this track. Again, Moon Safari are masters at providing the buildups and payoffs, and Between the Devil and Me definitely have those great buildups and those fantastic playouts, and that big crescendo at the end of this track feels so much like a homecoming that the first handful of listens, I legitimately got emotional, because I'm like, they're back, baby. They're back. They're back on their feet. They're back on their A game, and we're getting outstanding, absolutely outstanding music from Moon Safari. Then we come to the second single of Come On Eileen, which, or I always want to say it's Come On Eileen, it's Emma Come On, which is a fun, you know, it reminds me of some of the smaller tracks that we heard from Lover's End, you know, and it's fun, it's bouncy, you know, it doesn't quite stay the same amount as some of those other tracks from Lover's End, or even on the second disc of Bloomjud. But, you know, it's fun, it's quick, it's here, and then it's gone. And then we come into one of the more unique tracks, and the track that I just gush about. And that is A Lifetime to Learn How to Love. And this is just an outpour of emotion for me. You know, like it's really kind of two songs that are smashed together. We have the first half of this track, which is very traditional in a Moon Safari. You know, I'm reminded of like a moonwalk in that kind of sense, but really it's that second half that really gets me. The soaring guitar works on here that takes center stage, and that leads the track to its endpoint, and it's this massive crescendo that's just carried out throughout the rest of the song. It's so large, it's so airy, like it feels like I'm in this massive cathedral, or like, I don't know, cavern of some course, and like you look up and there's no ceiling. Like it's just straight up like the nebulous of the night sky without any light pollution at all, and you're just seeing these vast galaxies. You know, that's the absolute magnificence of this. You know, I'm feeling Ghosts of Flower Past definitely being like channeled on this track, and I absolutely love it. Then we come to Beyond the Blue, which is a little bit of a breather track. It allows us just to take a bit of a breather, before we come into Blood Moon, as I mentioned, is a bouncy, fun, kind of, it's interesting because it's almost like a foil to Mega Moon, which we found on Himlabacken Volume 1. And I'm going to get to a little bit of the compare and contrast between these two albums, because there is a little bit of like a wink and a nod to that first album. Like, this isn't necessarily like a full 1-2 punch. I mean, it's hard to be when almost a decade has passed between the two albums, but it definitely has a lot of the same like themes and motifs on it. And that's not just because that's Moon Safari's MO, like they've always had these, but even just within like the music itself kind of has that kind of flavor within it. Now, I know you all are waiting for this one, you know, the 20-minute long epic of Teen Angel Meets the Apocalypse. And much like Between the Devil and Me, we have a little bit of a darker theme, a little bit of a darker tone towards this. This is where there's a few moments in this track that I legit had to stop and be like, this isn't Dream Theater. I have to remind myself that this isn't Dream Theater. Like, the guitar works and the keyboard works blending with the overlay of drums and bass and that kind of like energy that they have towards it. It feels as if somebody put a little bit of like a time stop on Jordan Rudess and John Petrucci to be like, okay, don't play a million miles a minute, play maybe 100, you know, and we're just going to see where that goes, but still keep that same intensity and that same darkness. And there are moments within Teen Angel Meets the Apocalypse that have that essence, that have that raw metal, like progressive metal sound towards it, but they're wrapping it around this massive, huge epic. And man, like, this year we've had our fair shake of big epics, and this one is one of the absolute bests. This is just a fantastic example of laying down the groundwork for where the track is going to go in the, you know, in the latter half, the buildups and payoffs, the reusing of themes, the recontextualizing of themes, and the great presentation of an amazing progressive rock track, you know. And I haven't really felt like progressive rock as a whole has really gotten a lot. Like, the last one was The Myth of the Monster Fist last year with Ryo Locomotive's album, and this one follows suit, kind of showcasing that you can still write these amazing longer epics without feeling derivative, without not adding anything to the table. It's a fantastic exercise in constructing a brilliant and beautiful prog masterpiece in that sense. But we're not done there. We get the third longest track on the album, Forever You, which reminds me of the closing piece from A Doorway to Summer. You know, you had this massive, massive hit, this 20-plus minute track that then goes into a 10-minute closing piece. And I feel like that's very similar to what we have here. Forever for You is a great additional track on this album. I'm really loving the vibes on here. We're continuing with the good feels and the good environment that we're on. And I love that it is like the stereotypical classic sounding Moon Safari track. And we end with Epilogue, which is a really quick, short piece that reminds me of the last track from Lover's End Part 2. And it just does a good job of kind of like taking the final bow on the album. So yeah, this album, it met all of my expectations and in fact probably exceeded them. I cannot recommend this album enough. This is a great place to start. If you're a new fan for Moon Safari, if you've never heard of Moon Safari before, I think this is a great introduction to the band because really it's one of their best. You know, like this one can stand toe to toe with Bloom Judd any day of the week. And Bloom Judd, you know, it's one of my absolute favorites of theirs. So my final rating for this album obviously will be Himlabacken Volume 2 from Moon Safari is an album I absolutely love with my whole heart. It is very easily the best retro prog album of the year, and it's probably the best symphonic prog album of the year. I can't get enough of it. I honestly can't. The more I listen to it, the more I love it, and I'm so pleased to hear new music from Moon Safari in 2023, and I really hope that the next album we don't have to wait a decade for. So yeah, that's what I've got for Himlabacken Volume 2 from Moon Safari. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And that's all I got for you guys today. That's all I got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.